In last night's address to the nation, the president calling on the U.S. to maintain its moral clarity after he is gone. Thanks. In fact, the goal would seem to be improving upon government's moral clarity, especially this one's moral clarity about torture. Some encouraging signs reading the tea leaves at the confirmation hearing of Barack Obama's nominee to head the Justice Department, Eric Holder, at the outset of those hearings, which concluded today on Capitol Hill. Mr. Holder getting that question, the question on torture.
Do you agree with me that waterboarding is torture and illegal?
If you look at the history of the use of that technique, used by the Khmer Rouge, used in the Inquisition, used by the Japanese and prosecuted by us as war crimes, we prosecuted our own soldiers for using it in Vietnam. I agree with you, Mr. Chairman, waterboarding is torture.
Let's turn now to Jonathan Turley, constitutional law professor at George Washington University. John, good evening.
Hi, Keith.
Mr. Holder also said at these hearings, the quote is, we don't want to criminalize policy differences that might exist between the outgoing administration and the administration that is about to take over. This is echoing something President-elect Obama began to say in April. Is waterboarding, though, a policy or an act? Is Mr. Holder really threading a needle too carefully here? Or should we be reading into this that he will not be inclined to prosecute Bush officials?
Well, you know, there's a big difference between criminalizing policies and a policy of crimes. That's what we have here. We just had 3 attorney generals who couldn't tell the difference. And the question is whether he will prosecute confirmed crimes. Otherwise, people like Augusto Pinochet were just poor policymakers. You know, what we're talking about here is a war crime. And you can see that Holder is trying desperately to find an exit where he won't have to apply the law to a former president. But that's why there happens to be a cloth over the eyes of the symbol of justice. You're not really supposed to peek, and that's what he's doing.
The New York Times columnist Paul Krugman wrote something today. Let me read this verbatim, too. It's true that a serious investigation of Bush-era abuses would make Washington an uncomfortable place, but the price of protecting their comfort would be high. If we whitewash the abuses of the past 8 years, we'll guarantee that they will happen again. Doesn't that seem to be the answer right there? I mean, the Trump argument to all others, that absent any consequences, if we don't prosecute, if we don't uphold the idea that no matter who you are responsible for your actions within the law, eventually somebody will come back and use this as a precedent to say, no, it was all right then, it's got to be all right now.
That is certainly the case. This is perhaps one of the most transformative moments in our history. If we do nothing in the face of now confirmed war crimes, then they won't be Bush crimes. They'll be our crimes. That's the point. That if you walk away from a war crime, if you walk away from 8 treaties and federal laws that say that we cannot torture, then it becomes our shame. And so it's a defining moment for us. And I think what you're seeing, unfortunately, with Mr. Holder is this attitude that it's just an inconvenient time to deal with war crimes. Well, war crimes are always inconvenient. But that's not the point. If you say that no one's above the law, you have to apply the law. You can't just say, you're not above the law, what you did is wrong, we won't do it. Because if you don't prosecute this president, it means that there are some people above the law.
As for where the Republicans in the Senate still stand on this issue of the water board and torture, I want to play another exchange between Eric Holder and Senator John Cornyn, the Republican of Texas. Senator Cornyn has presented this hypothetical, cliched 24 ticking time bomb scenario where waterboarding, he says, is the only tool agents have to question the suspect, and he would not let go of the premise. Here's the tape.
Your hypotheticals assumes a premise that I'm not willing to...
I know you don't like my hypothetical.
No, the hypothetical is fine. The premise that underlies it I'm not willing to accept, and that is that waterboarding is the only way in which I could get that information from those people.
Assume it was.
Given the knowledge that I have about other techniques and what I've heard from retired admirals and generals and FBI agents, there are other ways in a timely fashion that you can get information out of people that is accurate and will produce usable intelligence. And so it's hard for me to accept or to answer your hypothetical without accepting your premise. I don't think I can do that.
John, do you think Mr. Cornyn was trying to set up this premise that Democrats who don't approve some terror under some circumstances, some torture, are soft on terror, or is Mr. Cornyn just not smart enough to realize that there can be interrogation without torture?
Well, this is a very, as you note, a common farcical hypothetical. I mean, first of all, if you put away the fact that all the studies by experts in this field show that junk is produced by torture, people will say anything. But also you have to ignore the fact that anyone who has played a role in putting a nuclear weapon in a city is probably going to give you false information with very little time to check it. But putting aside all of that, it doesn't really make sense. That is, the president still has the ability to pardon someone in the most extreme circumstances. What he does not have the right to do is to order war crimes as a policy, as this president did. But it's not who George Bush is that's in question now. It's who we are. And that's a question that Mr. Holder has yet to answer.
As has his boss. We will see. Jonathan Turley of George Washington University. As always, John, great thanks. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, Keith.